welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on the sociological research method, in today's lecture we are going to discuss on the nature of data. Now data is the most important thing in research because without data there is no research. So let us understand the nature of data, how it is connected with theory, knowledge, how do we kind of grapple with the question of collecting the specific data that is connected to our theory and research. So, to begin with, we know that it's undisputed that we live in an information age characterized by overwhelming and constantly accelerating generation of data. So, there's a lot of data around us. Now, as a researcher, we kind of get confused in terms of what is the data that is required for our specific research. So, research involves the task of collecting and analyzing the right data for a specific research question. So, in the previous lecture, we talked about hypothesis or the tentative statement that we are going to prove through the research. Now, how are we going to reach that stage? That is going to be through the type of data that we collect through our field work. So, the selection of data to which we need to collect is entirely dependent on the issue we investigated and theoretical framework guiding the research. Contrary to the belief that data represents a permanent solid fact, data are always evolving. So, before we kind of go into understanding the significance or impact on research, it's very important to understand what we mean by data. So, data refers to pieces of information such as observation, measurement or survey responses that researchers use to reach conclusion about specific issues. However, data may only represent a momentary truth. So, it's no grand generalization that the data which is collected today will stand true for say forever. So, for instance, a survey we conduct survey as a technique of data collection and the results on voting intentions can vary from day to day, even with the same respondents due to the shifting opinions or new influences. So, when we have elections and we are kind of deciding to collect data on the most say popular party or the leaders that we would want to select, the data response will change because of a lot of other connected factors. So, data is often seen as solid fact, but in reality it is both fleeting and open to distortion. Information can change over time, be affected by perspective and does not permanently represent truth. This is very important because and that explains the specificity of nature of the data, that it kind of stands true only with reference to the research which is it's trying to either prove or disprove. So, the value and meaning of data are often bound to specific times, places and perspective. What is recorded as a fact in one context might not hold true in another setting or even in the same setting at a later date as conditions and perceptions evolve. Data can become unreliable as it passes through human perceptions and memory. Hearsay, biased viewpoints and secondary reports can be mistaken for factual information. So, we try to understand the characteristics of data and the two critical characteristics are first, it's elusive. Data can be difficult to capture accurately as I just said that it because it depends on memory, on perceptions, many a time opinion. So, it's very difficult to actually kind of be very sure that the data is 100% correct. And the second nature of data is ephemeral. Data is transient. It may represent the truth only for a specified time, place and observer. The daily survey of voting intention perfectly illustrates this ephemerality. The results change daily, not because of a flaw in the survey, but because the phenomena being measured, people's intention, is constantly shifting based on new information, media coverage or personal reflection. So today I might decide to kind of be decided to vote for a particular leader or a party, and maybe I read a newspaper article or I had a discussion with someone, and then my opinion changes. So that survey results may not be completely true. Now, the data recorded on Monday is true for Monday, but it is not the truth for Tuesday. That implies that the data is true only for the specific time, region, and also the context in which the data has been recorded. This dynamic nature requires researcher to be mindful of the context, when and where the data was collected, and the timeliness of their finding, as conclusions based on data may be highly subjective to change. The two major issues that compromise the truthfulness of data is the nature, the characteristics that we discussed. One is ephemerality and the second is corruption. Ephemerality refers to the transient, short-lived nature of data, especially concerning human experience and phenomena. Over the time, subtle details of an event fade from memory. The actual phenomena being measured, example public opinion, market price, physical wear, is often in a state of flux, meaning data is only momental, that is, it is specific to that particular time. Corruption, or that is distorted data, refers to the interaction of inconsistencies and inaccuracy as data is recorded, transmitted, or interpreted. Through every stage, the time when we are collecting, to the time it is kind of analyzed, to the interpretation, and by the time it is transmitted in the forms of research report, the data can be subject to variance, and it can be not be the accurate data that was originally collected at the first instance. So, as the distance from original event increases, the likelihood of corruption rises. That is, secondary data is more prone to error than the primary data, because secondary data is collected from various sources like newspaper reports, other surveys already done before, and that cannot be kind of be very authentic in terms of representing a different time, a different space, and a different context. So, the subjective factors for the shift or changes in data are memory lapses. The human memory is reconstructive and unreliable. The second is biased interpretation. Second-hand reports, cultural viewpoints, and personal agenda can distort the original information. Third, recording method. Poor or subjective recording techniques can introduce inconsistency. Many a time, if the researcher depends on their own memory in terms of recording the data, over a period of time they might kind of forget, or even certain technology is used, it could kind of get corrupted, and therefore there is a loss of data. Because data is neither perfectly stable nor perfectly recorded, researcher must operate under the principle that certainty is rarely absolute and all results are provisionals. So, we know, we have understood what is data, what are the characteristics of data, what are the possibility of loss of data. Now, the most important part that is important for us to understand is in terms of the implication of data on the research that we are doing. And as we already talked about, with time, with passage of time, there is memory distortion and recording errors. Therefore, the more we are distanced from data, there is a higher chance of the loss. So, many a time if we are kind of referring, so doing a research in say 2025, and we bring in data collected in the say 5 years back or 10 years back, the response is that this data is not valid for the particular research because there has been a time lapse. So, because of these quality, the researcher must evaluate data critically, considering its source, how and when it was collected, and potential biases or errors that may have influenced its accuracy. So, most of the research report will tell us the limitations of data collections, or what were the kind of the percentage of which they would be an accuracy, especially if we kind of deal with quantitative data. Now, when we have detailed transparent methods are required to minimize corruption and to understand the limitation of research conclusions. Now, when we kind of look into the nature of data, here we also need to understand the level of abstraction. So, data form the most concrete layer of hierarchy that links abstract theory to measurable reality. They are the specific values taken by variables that ultimately allow theoretical claims to be tested and refined. In this way, data connect broad knowledge about how the world works with particular observation in a given study, turning theoretical language into something empirically examinable. Data, the most concrete and specific elements, are the essential raw material. When processed, aggregated, and interpreted, build upon to form knowledge in the shape of a theory. So, the data that we collect depends on what kind of theory we are going to refer, and at the again it is going to again lead to the construction of a theory. So, as we already discussed in the previous lecture, there is a cyclical flow from data to theory to knowledge and back to data. Now, the data and knowledge are kind of connected. There is a hierarchy, but there is a kind of flow. There is a two-way street that connects the grand abstract statement of a theory. So, the knowledge is abstract, it could be a grand generalization, but the data is very specific, empirical to a particular context. So, the two are kind of, there is a two-way flow between the statement of a theory or knowledge to the granular specific unit of a value, and that is the data. Now, first let us try to understand the hierarchy or the way in which the data and the knowledge are connected. So, the first is from knowledge, theory to data, which is the value. This is the deductive part. The path is the researcher's design process. It moves from the abstract to the concrete. So, we begin with the theory, and for a theory we kind of abstract certain concepts. The concepts would be kind of understood through indicators, and the indicators will give us variable or values that are relevant for that research. A research problem is first stated at a theoretical level. For example, poverty causes poor health. To test this theory that poverty causes poor health, researcher must break down the abstract terms, that is concepts, into observable empirical terms or indicators and variables. This process is often called operationalization, transforms the grand claim into a set of precise measurable questions that can be answered by collecting data. So, there has to be certain kind of variables, that is in terms of the income of the respondents, the health indicators, and to understand the health indicators there will be a number of variables used. So, and then there will be a connect between the poverty and the health of the respondent. The second way in which data and knowledge are related is from data, that is values, to knowledge, which is theory. Now, this is the inductive part. The first was the deductive, this is the inductive part. This path is the analysis and conclusion process. It moves from the concrete back to the abstract. Here we begin with values, and then to the indicators. From indicators we are able to construct certain significant concepts. Now, these concepts when connected together would lead to the growth of a theory. So, data values are collected through measurement. Example, the number of people per room. These values are summarized and analyzed to determine if pattern exists across the variable. For example, is high overcrowding linked to high instances of illness? If the pattern supports the lower level component, they build up to support the original concept, that is, poor living conditions support the concept of poverty. Ultimately, the aggregated evidence from all the collected data supports or refutes the overall theory, thus generating or modifying knowledge. Now, we have understood how the data and knowledge is connected. The second is we need to understand theory as a key aspect in research. The theory in research is a set of connected ideas that explain a phenomena by stating how different concepts are related. It can range from formal, well-tested framework to an informal hunch, but in all cases, it makes a claim about how some parts of the world work. Because theories are expressed in abstract terms, they cannot be tested or observed directly. The use in research, they must be broken down into the constituent concepts, the key ideas involved in the process. The proposed relationship between the concepts, which can be translated into indicators, variables, and measurable data. Theories organize existing findings into a coherent explanation, suggest what to look for in a new research, and are themselves refined or challenged by empirical result. So earlier we have talked about how one of the important component of research is do a literature review. The literature review is basically to become familiar with existing theories. When we read theories, we are able to find out what are the gaps in the research, and from these gaps we kind of construct our hypothesis or research questions, and then the kind of data that we would collect depends on the nature of the theory itself. So, in this way, theory and research forms a cycle in which theory guides data collection and analysis, and data in turn support, modify, or overturn theoretical claims. This process of breaking down an abstract theory into measurable part is critical for moving from the abstract claim to empirical investigation. Now, after discussing knowledge, then theory, now we come to the role of concepts, the significance of concepts in research and how data kind is connected to the building of concepts. Concepts, as we are already familiar with, are the building blocks of a theory, serving as essential intermediate step between abstract theoretical statement and concrete measurable data. A concept is a term or a label given to a particular phenomena. They range from the highly abstract, for example, alienation, equilibrium, justice, these are kind of abstract concepts, to the quite concrete one, that is animal, town, income. You can kind of understand specifically to what this concept is referring to. So, even concrete terms like town require shared understanding to be useful in research. For example, what population size qualifies a settlement as a town? So, there are other kind of terms or concepts that kind of confuse with the concept of town. So, it could be a city, it could be a community. So, one indicator that can be used to differentiate or kind of clarify the concepts is the population of the settlement. Concepts are fundamental to how we understand the world and communicate ideas. The meaning of a concept can vary significantly based on culture, language, or social context. Example, the difference in meaning for respect between social group. So, it is a subjective concept. The meaning can differ from one group to the other. Some concepts are technical and domain specific. For example, anticipatory socialization in sociology, dermatology physics in forensics. So, these are kind of concepts which could be understood only with reference to the discipline in which it is used. Now, this to understand these concepts, it would require a kind of an expert knowledge of that particular domain or the discipline. The most important idea of understanding or the concepts of understanding the relationship between theory, concepts is how we kind of face the challenge of definition, especially when we are dealing with concepts. The utility of a concept in research hinges on its clear and precise definition. So, concept clarity is very important when we are doing any kind of research, because the way in which data would be collected and finally analysis and the research report would depend on how much of clarity of concepts is there. Defining concept is often relatively easy here, because the phenomena they describe are frequently tangible or operate under fixed laws. So, for instance, these we have these concepts of radio waves, acceleration, elements. These are kind of very specific to the natural sciences, where the understanding depends on certain laws. This is where the challenge lies. The phenomena are often human created, subjective or complex, making precise, universally accepted definition for concepts like democracy, culture or poverty much more difficult. Now, after concepts, we will try to understand indicators. So, we have done knowledge, we have done theory, concepts and now indicators. Indicators are the crucial third step in translating abstract theory into measurable data. Indicators are the observable phenomena that signal the presence of existence of an abstract concept. They bridge the gap between the theoretical world of concept and the empirical world of variable and data. So, what are the roles of the indicators? Number one, bridging the abstract and concrete. So, concepts are abstract and the data are kind of concrete. So, they can be connected. So, like anxiety, poverty, social capital cannot be directly perceived. The second role of indicators is need for sign. To study these concepts, especially which has a kind of multiple meanings, the researcher must look for indicators, perceivable, tangible or audible sign that support the concept is active or present. For example, to the concept of anxiety. Anxiety is an internal mental state. Now, how do we kind of understand the indicator? The trembling, worried facial expression, facing, sweating, short breath. So, these are some of the indicators or symbols that would indicate that a person is anxious or is kind of having anxieties. These are the perceivable effects of the unperceivable now. Now, the anxiety is visible, the external is visible, but what are the cause of anxiety is kind of internal, and there could be several ways in which we can understand the concept. Now, then we try to understand, first is the challenge of definition, the second is the challenge of consensus. The usefulness of an indicator depends on its acceptance and clarity. So, scientific and technical subjects in field like physics or chemistry, indicators are often well defined and universally accepted. Example, the indicator for an acidic solution is certain change in litmus paper. So, many of us, when we do science and physics and chemistry, we know even from schools we have read that if it is an acid, the color of the litmus paper would be one color, and then it could be blue or red if it is a base. So, these are certain consensus achieved by the scientific community to test acid and base. Humanities and social sciences, such a consensus is difficult. It is more challenging. Consensus is often lacking in social sciences. Why? Because human phenomena are complex and context dependent, and it is also subjective. It kind of changes more quickly. For example, what indicates poor health? Is it doctor's visit, self-reported illness or mortality rate? So, what is when there is so much of lack of clarity in the social sciences, or we do not have certain indicators to measure this, the research requirement is that researchers in social sciences must carefully define the indicators within the scope of each specific project to ensure clarity and reproducibility. This step of defining indicator is part of operationalization, the process of turning abstract ideas into a plan for measurement. The next logical step is to break down these indicators into variables which are the actual component that will be measured. Variables in research are measurable components used to gauge the extent or degree of an indicator related to a concept. They represent characteristics or attributes that can vary or change across, such as age, income, gender, or frequency of an event. For example, in social science, while abstract concepts like anxiety are hard to measure directly, a variable like the rate of breathing can serve as a measurable proxy. So, if we were to understand whether an individual is anxious or not, one way could be to measure the breath. If the person's rate of breathing is high, then it is an indication that the person is anxious. Now, when we talk into types of variables, variables fall into different types, including independent variables, which are manipulated or categorized to observe the effect, and dependent variable, which are the outcome influenced by independent variables, and other types such as control or extraneous variables that may affect the result. Variables can be qualitative, categorical, that is gender, occupation, or quantitative, that is numerical, number of people, income, depending on the data. So, values are the unit of measurement used to qualify these variables. They represent the actual recorded pieces of data that form the empirical foundation of research. So, when we kind of come to an understanding from the above discussion, we can conclude that data are fragile, partial traces of reality rather than perfect, unquestionable fact. Data can be situated within the hierarchy from theory to values and are indispensable for testing and refining theoretical data, but their limitation requires cautious interpretation and modest probability claim. So, when we kind of try to understand the nature of data, the reference for this is Wallman Nicholas' book published in 2010. The name is Research Method, the Basic, and the nature of data is being discussed in chapter 4 from pages 65 to 77. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.